Hello everyone, my name is 3K and I'm going to show you today how to fix the trigger on your Pimax Swords. Out of the box, the trigger is ungodly terrible. The problem mostly lies in the fact that the spring is just way too weak. This is a pretty easy problem to fix. You only need a few very basic tools and some pry tools or a fingernail. Optionally, I would recommend having some kind of electrical tweezer. The ones I use have this flat head. These will make your life a lot easier getting the spring back in, but otherwise are not strictly necessary. In any case, let's get started with this disassembly and what the process is to get these fixed. So the first thing you're going to do is you're just going to remove the battery cover and pull the battery out. One thing to note is on my batteries, I've put a piece of Kapton tape that goes on the back here and folds over. This makes these batteries enormously easier to pull out, and it's something I would highly recommend. Now, just as a warning, you are going to avoid your warranty when you're doing this, so if you want to keep your warranty, you'll unfortunately have to suck it up. However, since I obviously don't care about my warranty, we shall keep going. So, once we have the battery out, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to push down the button with the strap, and we're going to pull the strap all the way out. Once you do this, you're going to notice that the flex point up here actually has no spring-loaded tension of its own. This is completely normal. Don't worry about it. Any apparent springiness in this joint here is created by the hand strap itself and not actually any springs internally. This definitely helps a lot with mechanical simplicity. Anyway, the next step is going to be to remove 6 screws. So there are 6 screws in total to remove. There's one up here towards the trigger. There are 2 down here, one over here, and one over here. And then there's 3 screws within the battery compartment itself. So within the battery compartment, you can see there is a groove right here. This will indicate where one of the screws is. The other 2 screws on the opposite side, there's one in the middle directly across from this one, and one towards the very top. You will either have to remove this label or you'll have to punch through it. I have chosen to punch through it. So all you need to do is remove these 6 screws, and then we will move on to the next step. Keep in mind, these screws are all the same size except for one, but that we will identify the one oddball pretty easily. All you will need is a single Phillips head screwdriver, if I haven't mentioned that already. I would recommend having one that's extendable like this one. It will make your life a lot easier getting to some of these screws, just due to where the tracking ring is located. The screws a little more difficult to reach. Might help to go them this way. Yep. Try and keep track of these screws. Losing them would not be recommended, though you can tolerate to lose a couple. And then we're going to loosen these 2 that are under the label. And once that's done, we're going to move on to the next step. The next step is going to be removing this top decal. This is pretty easy to do. I will demonstrate this with a pry bar, but you can very much do this with the fingernail. Start at this end, by the very top of the trackpad where it's thinnest, and just simply wedge underneath. I'm actually going to use my fingernail because it's going to be a lot easier. And just pry it up. And then just move around the edge of it, slowly releasing this adhesive. This adhesive is not very strong and you can remove it fairly easily. This is a lot weaker than when it was first on there, just because I've removed this a few times. Once you've removed that decal, there will be a total of 3 screws in this compartment. These are all, again, the same size. Be sure to keep track of your screws so you don't lose any of them. I'm going to shorten my screwdriver now. I don't need the extra length. Once you have those 3 screws out, you will need to pop off this top plate. This is not connected to anything. It may require a little bit of prying, but it will come out pretty easily. If you've ever taken off the facial interface for one of the older Pimax headsets, you will know how much pressure that takes. This does not require anywhere near as much. It comes off pretty easily, and you shouldn't have to force anything at all. Now that we have that off, let's take a note of what we see within this controller. We have 2 buttons and our trackpad. The ribbon cable for the trackpad is attached on the back, so do not try to remove this. It is held in by 3 screws here, here, and here. These are all smaller than the screws we've taken out. I would not recommend removing these at any point during this disassembly, unless for some reason you do need to remove the trackpad. Notice these 2 buttons here and here. These have ribbon cables attached to them that go to capsense sensors. Be mindful of these, but otherwise you do not need to do too much. Next, so the next step is going to be to push the strap holder all the way forward, and deep inside the controller right here, there is a Phillips head screw with a flared head. This is the only oddball screw out of during this entire disassembly. It may also get stuck on the magnet holding the battery cover. Once you have that out, simply push up. You may want to flex the body of the controller like this. That will make this pop out pretty easily. And then you can just remove that like so. And as you can see, the screw is slightly flared. So just keep a note of that and where it goes. You can set that to the side now. Once we have that out, all we need to do is remove this main ribbon connector here. This is a nice connector. It can pop out easily, pops back in easily. You don't have to worry about any latches. And that's the only ribbon connector that you'll have to remove for now. Next, you'll need to remove 2 screws. There's one down here, and then there's one over here. Do not remove this one that is screwed into this plastic piece. This is, again, a different size screw and will not help you remove this. The one you want is by, let's see if I can get it. So there's 2 screws, one up here and then one further down. You want to take out the one further down and leave the one that's screwed into the transparent plastic. I think the correct term is translucent. And then on the other side, right by the sensor, keep in mind that we are not taking out the screw holding in the touchpad. That one is screwed into black plastic. You want the one screwed into a metal-ish piece. With that out, this whole assembly can now pop right out. Push in where the trigger is, lift up the back, and this will slowly work its way out. You'll have to wiggle it a little bit, but it will otherwise not be held in by anything else. Really, the most difficult part is getting the trigger out of its cavity. Once that's done, you can set the main body with the tracking reed off to the side, as we will no longer need that. And then on the bottom side, this is the trigger assembly. There is a single ribbon cable going from the main board to the trigger. This is for capsense, which is not yet implemented if you follow Pimax. On the board, there is a less desirable style of ribbon connector. Just simply lift the latch near the word cap. Just lift that straight up and pull out the ribbon cable. Next, you'll have to remove this pin, the main pin that holds in the trigger. This can only come out one way. One end has a little lip that holds the pin in and keeps it from going in further. Just simply start at that end and push it out. I would recommend using a screwdriver. Get started. And just like that, the pin is removed. That's all you need to do. There's nothing too complicated here. With that out, the trigger can be removed, and the spring has disappeared on me. Oh, it's still there. So here we see the spring that regulates the trigger. Now this spring is a little stretched since I have already done this once, but I'm taking it apart to stretch it a little more since the pressure between the two controllers isn't even. I would recommend getting something to grab onto this end of the spring. I use one of my bits that's shallow, and I just insert it in the end. And then with another one of my fingers, I just push. And I stretch the spring a bit, just like that. And the spring is now preloaded. This preloading is very important and will make this spring way, way better than it was originally put in. That's all you need to do, is just stretch the spring a little bit. You can also replace the spring entirely, but why bother spending money? Now, let's reassemble the controller. This is where things get difficult now. The best way I have found to do this is to first put the trigger back in its slot, and then push the pin through the holder on this side here, and through the first hole here. But you do not want to go further than that. Not until you've installed the spring. Now, I've pushed the pin in a bit too far, so I'm just going to flush it out with my tweezers. I'm going to grab the spring. You want to put it with a little hook going up towards the controller, and the straight ends down towards the metal body. Just like that. Now, I want to press the spring in. This is where things get very difficult. And then push the pin through the middle of the spring. This is not the easiest thing to do, but it's not too bad. Once it's through, you just have to shimmy the pin a bit to get it through the other holes. This will take just a little bit of nudging, and that went through a lot easier than it normally does. Now this is very important. You want to push this pin in as far as it can go. If you do not do this, the trigger will not go back into the housing correctly. So make sure you push this pin in all the way. Now, all we need to do is reinsert the ribbon cable into this slot where we pulled it out of. Having tweezers makes this job a lot easier. And then just push down on the little connector tab. We have now fixed the trigger. Now we just need to reassemble. What I would recommend doing is, if you have already done the other one, push your triggers together to get a feel of the difference in strength between the two. And as you can see, I need to strengthen this a little more. So all we need to do is remove the ribbon cable, push the pin out, grab the spring, stretch it out, and then reinstall. Now I have found that stretching the two legs to be approximately 90 degrees apart seems to give a pretty good amount of tension. There's a lot better, but any amount of preloading is going to make the trigger much, much better than what it comes stock. And then we're just going to reassemble. Getting the spring in is always difficult. We did not succeed in getting the pin through. So we're just going to start over, push the pin out. As you can see, this process can be difficult. Just be patient, especially depending on how much you stretch the spring. We actually have to tighten a little bit. Keep in mind, you typically cannot recompress the spring after you stretch it. So be conservative with your stretching until you get the trigger about where you like it. There we go. Now that that's through, just push it straight through. Push it all the way to the end. Now we're going to compare spring strength. As we can see, we've made it a lot harder, but they are this one's a little firmer than the right controller, but they are very close. They're almost exact, actually. So now we can fully reassemble this. Reinsert that capsense cable, even though it currently has no use. We're going to grab our main body now, and we're just going to reinsert it. Want to tip it in so the trigger goes in first into its cavity, and then you want to push down at the front. Make sure that pin isn't all the way, which it is. With a little finesse, it will pop right in, and it should sit flush. Now, it'll want to pop out a little bit. This is fine. Don't worry about it. All we need to do is start reinstalling screws. Just take one of the screws. Again, all the screws you've taken out are identical sizes, so you don't need to keep track of which is which. And then just reverse the disassembly process. Additionally, while we are here, if you find that this joint between the tracking ring and the controller grip is loose, which it may become, you can tighten this pretty easily. All you need to do is pull up 3 ribbon cable connectors. These are all nice connectors. They will come up pretty easily. And just push these all back. This will reveal 2 screws. These 2 screws are the only things that keep this joint tight. There's some machining that also keeps the connector on, and this is made of metal. This will last pretty well, but these 2 screws do not have Loctite, which means they may occasionally work themselves loose over time. I would highly recommend getting some blue Loctite, adding it to these screws, and then just tightening them down again. These are already pretty tight. My left controller didn't have this issue, but my right controller did. So now, we're just going to reassemble. Keep in mind the order that the cables came out in. And then we're going to reattach all the cables. That 1 ribbon connector is very easy to reassemble. And remember, there's no spring here, so don't look for it like I did the first time. Next, I'm going to take our battery cover, or battery piece. I'm going to insert the bottom end into the tracking ring, and this should lay flat, and it should be a pretty nice fit. Now up here at the top of this piece, there's a little plastic flap. Let's see if we can get that on camera. As you can see, there's a slight indent here. That is what we had to bypass when we were first disassembling. We had to flex the controller body. So make sure that little tab goes under this part of the plastic housing. Sorry, my lighting isn't very good. Just make sure that goes under like that. And then just start reassembling. Start with the oddball screw you pulled out with the flared head. You will need to contend with that magnet, and you'll have to get deep into the controller. And then just screws right in. Then start reassembling. These screws were kept in place by the label, so we can just tighten them down. And try not to tighten these too much. You want these snug, but don't try and over tighten them. Some of these are only going into plastic, though some of them have proper nuts embedded into the plastic. Just try and get these as snug as you can reasonably. If you're having to exert more pressure than you are to sharpen a pencil, you're probably doing too much. Then our last screw, which you don't need a screwdriver to be this long for. And then, one thing to make sure is you don't lose this rubber piece that goes to the system button. Oh no, this is the menu button. Make sure you don't lose this rubber piece. And try not to stretch this flex cable the button is on. And just put it on top, like that. Take your top piece. Align this notch with this align the notch in the top piece with this sensor over here. Like so. And then it should fall into place where the buttons are. Then you'll take a little bit of finesse, and this will snap down into place. Like so. Make sure to engage all the plastic clips, and then take your 3 remaining screws, and then just screw them in. Take your decal, align it with your buttons, and then just press it on. Give a good amount of pressure, and it'll stay there nicely. Reinsert your battery. Put your battery cover on. And take the wristband and thread it back through this hole. This will be a little difficult. Once you get started, be able to pull it through with the help of some tweezers or a screwdriver. And just like that, power on your controller, and there you go. You have fixed the triggers in your Pimax Swords. That's all you need to do, and just repeat this process for the other one. Make sure you take the time to balance the tension of the springs between your two controllers for the best user experience. That's all I have, and thank you for watching.